Today from the global lane, Assad is overthrown and a new leader talks about peace and unity. Can Syrians trust the former al-Qaeda operative?
Who was actually dispatched there by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the now dead head and founder of the Islamic State. They're on their way to establish an Islamic State.
He's yet to be sworn in, and Donald Trump is already advancing his presidential agenda. But will he gain Senate approval for all his cabinet picks?
If there really are people holding out or who come out publicly and the numbers are in doubt, I do think you'll see him fight for his team. It's pretty hard to say no to a president of your own party.
Foreign money flowing to American universities. Hundreds of millions go unreported.
I found that universities had failed to report $1 billion.
Move over, ministers. AI Jesus is in the church.
Remember that in the face of adversity, love and faith are your steadfast guides.
And it's all right here on the global lane. Israel conducts preemptive strikes to protect itself from militant Islamists who have taken control of Syria. Just how dangerous are the new rulers in Damascus, the rebel group HTS, Hayat Tahrir el-Sham? And what might the future hold for Israel and Syrian Christians under their rule? Well, joining us to provide some insights is Middle East Forum Director Greg Roman. Greg, the Islamist leader now forming an interim government in Damascus, Abu Mohammed el-Jilani, once headed up the al-Nusra Front, which was affiliated with al-Qaeda, and he pledged to impose Sharia law and establish a caliphate throughout the Levant. But now he says he wants peace with Syria's neighbors, except for Iran and Hezbollah. And he wants to protect the rights of all minority groups in Syria. So has the leopard changed his spots? Why should we believe him?
I think we have to be very cautious and careful about the fact that a so-called former al-Qaeda operative, the head of al-Qaeda's divisional command in Syria, who was actually dispatched there by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the now dead head and founder of the Islamic State, is claiming to want peace. I think that his words versus the actions on the grounds have to be carefully criticized and analyzed insofar as it relates that there's a very different fabric of what's going on in the day-to-day operations now in post-Assad Syria, rather than what his missives may suggest otherwise.
Well, how about Syria's Christian community? Many are saying they're fine for now. They're not suffering atrocities yet. They're concerned for the future. How concerned should they be?
So there is something to be given that HTS, when it was ruling just Idlib, which is the sliver of Syrian territory that it's controlled for the past 13 years in the northwest of the country, went so far as to have Islamist-ran ministries encourage Christians to celebrate Christmas, Easter, and other holidays, especially from the Syriac Orthodox churches that were active in that province. But now that they've moved from a rebel group to taking full control, or almost full control, of all Syrian territory west of the Euphrates River, and even have gone so far as to try and bring the top bishop from Aleppo to speak on their behalf. I'm not sure if they're going to keep on carrying out these type of propaganda-like exercises, considering the fact that they're on their way to establish an Islamic State in Syria.
So we've got to look at their past and look what they've done in Idlib and elsewhere. And how about Israel? Now, they've received international criticism for taking out Syrian naval ships in Latakia and destroying chemical weapons facilities near Damascus, even sending troops over the border into Syria from the Golan. So did those actions violate international law? How important was it for Israel to take those measures?
I think anyone looking at a clear-eyed view of what is happening now in Syria in a post-Assad regime, and even reports that have come out from the Ministry of Intelligence and the Ministry of the Interior in Syria, leaked documents that were actually put on Twitter this week, show that there was sort of a Faustian bargain between Israel and Assad prior to his fall, in which Israel agreed for Syria to have a certain amount of arms to be able to fight back against the insurgency, which has now completely conquered the territory, as I said beforehand, west of the Euphrates. But that was in exchange for it trying to provide Israel with backgrounders information on weapons transports that were being sent from Iran into Iraq through Syria and then to Hezbollah. Now that that bargain is officially over, Israel had to invoke Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, its right to self-defense, and take out any strategic weaponry that, God forbid, would fall into the hands of the Islamist mercenaries and the Islamist rebels, which have now taken over Damascus. Israel was well within its international rights to destroy any weaponry which new forces that it does not have an agreement with would be able to use to target Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. I think it was completely justified, and the international community is acting like a peanut gallery, not understanding Israel's true security needs.
Yeah, I can't imagine HTS with a Navy and also with chemical weapons. Can you?
No, not at all. And it's not just it's not just Israeli forces which have been on the lookout for this. There are reports of American intelligence provision to its Kurdish allies in the SDF, for members of the Druze communities in Swaya and southern Syria on the northern Golan Heights, but on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights, helping provide information on the whereabouts of this area. And even we have reports of a top Syrian chemist being assassinated in the neighborhoods of Damascus. So I think Israel is going to its full extent to not just eliminate the apparatus, which was Syria's chemical weapons program, but also all those who have the know-how and the knowledge to reactivate it under an HTS regime.
Okay, now Turkey has supported HTS and another group, the SNA, which is really the Turkish surrogate army battling Kurdish forces in northeast Syria. So to what extent should the U.S. get involved to help our Kurdish allies? After all, I mean, you remember they helped Donald Trump and the United States eliminate the ISIS threat. They destroyed the Islamic Caliphate. So what should we do about it?
I think it's come to recognize the U.S. policy should call for a semi-autonomous or maybe completely autonomous region of Rojava, or that of the Kurdish enclave, which is east of the Euphrates River in northeast Syria. And if the U.S. is not willing to back its Kurdish allies, what kind of message does that send to other American allies throughout the rest of the world, which have fought hand in glove with American forces on the ground in areas which have posed a threat to U.S. national security interests? As it relates to Turkey, this is the Ottomanization of Erdogan's grand vision to cast the Sunni Pale to replace the Shia Crescent, which is now dissolving as Iran is kicked out of the greater Arabic-speaking Middle East. And I think the U.S. has to be very careful in terms of dealing with the SNA, with HTS, and any other force which may come to power in Damascus. It should be U.S. policy to back its allies to the hilt. And right now, Erdogan is not acting like an American ally insofar as he's supporting, arming, and giving logistics and intelligence to a force which is trying to wipe out the Kurdish presence in Syria.
I know you'll be keeping an eye on this for further developments, Greg, and thank you for your time. Middle East Forum Director Greg Roman, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Gary.
A bumpy road to confirmation may still await some of Donald Trump's cabinet nominees. Will they eventually gain favor as the process unfolds on Capitol Hill? And are Trump's priorities for his first 100 days realistic? Just how much can he accomplish without all of his cabinet members in place? Well, here to explain is Phil Kerpen, president of the American Commitment. Phil, it seems like the tide may be turning for Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense as some skeptical Republican senators feel the MAGA political heat. There's a lot of pressure, especially on Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and Joni Ernst. Will Hegseth, in your opinion, get the votes? What will make the difference?
Well, we'll have to see how the hearings go in the Senate Armed Services Committee, but I think that he sort of survived the first volley of attacks against him and seems to have turned a corner with Joni Ernst in particular, who had sort of indicated she was likely to oppose him. And then the state attorney general, Brenna Bird, kind of said, maybe I'll have to primary you. And then Ernst seems to have straightened herself out and now says that she's likely to support Hegseth. And so he seems to have maybe rounded a corner. Of course, the big question is, will any of the anonymous, salacious allegations against him become non-anonymous and have actual witnesses step forward and try to undermine him, kind of in a scandal sense? Will we get a repeat of the Kavanaugh type stuff? That would create a lot of uncertainty if it happens. If it doesn't happen, if no named accuser comes forward, I think he'll be approved. And I think the media will have another black eye for running all of these stories, without sourcing.
Yeah, and that's how it goes all the time in Washington, doesn't it? Media and opponents smearing you. And it isn't only Hegseth. Democrats and members of the media, even some Republicans, question the qualifications of Kash Patel for FBI director and Tulsi Gabbard for national intelligence. So how can they win over the doubters?
The Kash Patel one sort of confuses me because you got people like John Bolton saying this is like the worst thing that ever happened in the history of the country. And you've got, a lot of people going crazy about how terrible he is. And I can't really tell why. I can't really tell what exactly in his background they think makes him ill-suited to this role. As far as I know, the thing he's most famous for was authoring the Devin Nunes memo that disproved the Russiagate and the dossier stuff, and everything that he said was true. He was completely vindicated on the episode for which he's most famous. So it's odd to me that so many people seem to be going crazy about his nomination, and I'm not sure what they think makes him ill-suited to the role. So, I mean, unless they come up with something concrete and not just, wailing and gnashing of teeth, I think that he will get through. But I'll tell you, the vehemence of the opposition indicates they're going to try awfully hard to come up with something to disqualify him.
And how about Tulsi Gabbard? I mean, she's a lieutenant colonel, and she was involved in intelligence. What's the problem there?
Well, I mean, the problem there from the perspective of a lot of foreign policy hands is that she's been critical of most of the major U.S. foreign policy decisions of the last couple of decades, including the major decisions to go to war. And, they therefore see her as an opponent and maybe a likely opponent of the next major military engagements that the establishment may be pushing for. But in terms of qualifications, I think it's very hard to make the case that she isn't qualified. And the other thing in her case that I think makes it very difficult for senators to vote against her is she was a pretty significant part of the campaign. And so, you can't really say that this is not what the American people wanted when they voted for President Trump, because she was out there on the campaign trail endorsing him and campaigning with him. And
do you think Trump may need to make some phone calls here, or a personal visit to Capitol Hill to meet with reluctant Republicans?
We'll see. I think, if there really are people holding out or who come out publicly and the numbers are in doubt, I do think you'll see him fight for his team. And it's pretty hard to say no to a president of your own party.
The vetting and nomination process could take months. So how likely is it then that Donald Trump will be able to move forward with his agenda in the first 100 days without a full cabinet?
Well, under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, he can designate acting heads of all of the departments and agencies. And I suspect they already have pretty strong contingency plans for who they're going to put in on a temporary basis in these key jobs while they wait on confirmations that could take a little bit longer. So I don't think that that's going to hold things up. My major concern in terms of being able to move quickly when they come in had been the lack of an agreement with the FBI on vetting staff, which actually would have prevented the early teams from coming in and getting control of these agencies. But that's now been cleared. They do have an agreement in place. And so I think they're going to be able to move pretty quickly. And one thing to watch for is some of the people who've been nominated to kind of lesser roles, for instance, Matt Whitaker kind of surprisingly didn't get anything. He was rumored to be up for potentially a major role at DOJ or something like that. Instead, he was nominated ambassador to NATO. Under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, anyone who's confirmed to any Senate confirmation job can, on a temporary basis, be designated the acting head of any other agency. And so you may see some strategies that involve getting people confirmed to kind of minor roles and then redeploying them, at least temporarily, while we wait for some of these other people to be confirmed.
And quickly, do you think immigration and deportation will be the top priority?
Well, I think you're going to see a very, very early push, including a whole stack of executive orders to get control of the border situation, just as Biden did the opposite. He opened the border with a whole flurry of executive actions. And I think it's pretty clear, some of the very first staffers that were announced were Tom Homan and Stephen Miller in the White House, who I think are going to lead the border effort, along with Kristi Noem at DHS. And what I expect to happen is an all-out diplomatic push with Mexico, which we've already seen begin to stop the flow of migrants and drugs across the southern border. And of course, if Mexico readopts the Remain in Mexico policy that Trump had in his first term, they'll also logically stop the flow of people across their own southern border, because they don't want all of those people to be stuck in Mexico. And so the flow will sort of be double blocked, most likely, if he can be successful in those diplomatic efforts. And then there's the deportation question. I think they've given a lot of thought to the logistics of this. It's not going to be an initial effort to deport millions of people. It's going to be a targeted effort to deport 200,000 to 300,000 hardened criminal illegal aliens who've committed violent crimes in this country, who are gang members, rapists, murderers, and so forth. And that, I think, will give the administration an enormous upper hand if sanctuary jurisdictions try to not cooperate, because they're literally going to be protecting really horrible people. And public opinion, I think, is going to shift against them.
Okay, Phil Kerpen, American Commitment President, thank you for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Guy.
U.S. campaign finance law prohibits politicians from accepting foreign campaign contributions. Many still reap the benefits of foreign money donated to political action committees. But what about universities and foreign cash? Our next guest says in the past 4 years, they have failed to disclose $1 billion in foreign donations. Here with us is Neetu Arnold. She's a Young Voices contributor and Paulson policy analyst at the Manhattan Institute. Neetu, this is disturbing because federal law requires full disclosure, and many of these foreign funders are influencing young college student minds through their contributions. So you've done the research. Tell us more on what you discovered.
I think it's such a problem that universities have failed to follow federal law. Federal law requires universities to report at least $250,000 in foreign money each year. This is a law that has existed since 1986, but for years, universities have skirted the law. During the first Trump administration, they actually investigated a dozen universities and found that they misreported, or they hadn't even reported more than $6 billion. And when I decided to investigate what happened after the Trump administration was complete and the Biden administration was there, I found that universities had failed to report $1 billion in foreign money. And much of the misreporting was from countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, primarily countries that are authoritarian. And I was able to look into this by filing more than 100 public records requests across the country. And I compared the information that I received through these requests with the information that universities had reported to the federal government. And so what I really learned through this process was that it's so important that we have enforcement mechanisms, that there are penalties in place so that universities have an incentive to report these funds. It would also be great to see audits.
Well, tell me which universities are the worst offenders and why are they not abiding by the law?
Well, I mean, there are several universities that just had not reported their funds throughout the past 4 years. You know, one university that caught me by surprise was actually Texas A&M University, in part because they were actually one of the universities that was investigated by the Trump administration. And it turned out that during the Trump administration, the university was in compliance. They were reporting their foreign funds. And then after the Trump administration left, I looked at their reporting for Chinese contracts, and it turned out that they just weren't reporting any of them.
Well, we've reported in the past about university contributions from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and that raised concerns about anti-Israel sentiments expressed in Middle East Studies programs. So tell us more on what you found there.
Right. So I think one thing that was interesting about my research was that I was actually able to see the donors and why they were donating to the universities in the first place. I think that's actually one of the flaws with the federal reporting requirements. You know, even though universities are supposed to report funds greater than $250,000 a year, there are many gifts that we don't see because they're less than $250,000. I would also say that we don't know who the donors are, and that was something I was able to see. You know, I was at Columbia University. I saw many donations from Turkey, from the Sabanci family, from Koch Holding Company. I thought that was very interesting to see. I saw many gifts that were way under the 250,000 threshold that were from the Qatar Foundation. And so I think it's so important to know who is donating to our universities and the purpose, whether it's going for cancer research or is it going to influence our curriculum?
Well, there can be bundling also, I'm sure. So they make several donations through different families and companies in those countries and stay under that threshold. So what about the influence of China through Confucius classrooms?
Yeah, so I think Confucius classrooms is something that affects K through 12 more, but I did see many gifts that were coming from China that were not reported. You know, there were several gifts that were coming for the Confucius Institutes that had not been previously reported. And again, I think that's why it's so important that we have transparency, that there is enforcement, and that we're actually aware of these transactions in a timely manner.
Okay, Neetu Arnold, a Young Voices contributor and Polson policy analyst at Manhattan Institute. I know you're saying, look, we just need more transparency and compliance here. So, and enforcement. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
In this era of self-service, many stores and businesses have reduced costs by eliminating cashiers and installing do-it-yourself checkouts. Similarly, a church in Lucerne, Switzerland, has removed the need for a priest in the confessional. Now, Catholics can enter the confessional with their rosaries and recite 10 Hail Marys with the help of AI Jesus.
Hello, Jesus. Do you have some advice for us in this time?
In these challenging times, remember that in the face of adversity, love and faith are your steadfast guides. Just as I calm the stormy seas, so too can peace be found within your heart. Amidst life's tempests, let kindness and compassion steer your course.
Folks, do you see where this is headed? Who needs the real God when AI Jesus seems to have all the answers? It's almost like a biblical version of Siri or Alexa. However, the one true God offers us something much better, a personal relationship with Him. AI Jesus is not personal. It merely regurgitates pre-programmed words of Jesus found in the Bible. So what is missing in all of this? The Holy Spirit. You cannot receive His guidance digitally. This only happens through prayer, reading the Bible, seeking Him, and following His direction. Yes, AI Jesus can be a tool used by God to draw people closer to Him. However, let's not depend on this digital image of God created by humans, instead of turning to the one and only God who created humankind. Innocent intentions can easily evolve into idolatry. Remember, only through the blood sacrifice of Jesus do we have the promise of eternal life. AI Jesus cannot provide that. Only God can bring us what we long for: salvation, true love, and peace. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.